Chapter 2 of Domesticity Drabbles from the Undertale AU fandom. Written by Red with Determination and narrated by the very same. Chapter 2. Cat Got Your Tongue? Underfell Sans? Ex-Reader. Summary. Red bonds with a human over their mutual dislike of cicadas and wrestles with feelings that he's not used to. Notes. Trigger warning. Insects, anxiety/low self-esteem, bugs flying into places they shouldn't go, and hungry cat wants noms. I had to up the rating because of Red's potty mouth. Also, this chapter is for LoveCakeBacon, who requested a one-shot with Underfell Sans. Sorry it took me so long, buddy. It all began with a simple sound. Of course, anyone who has lived out in the country knows what that telltale wee whir noise is. At the beginning of summer, it's quite often gentle, as only a few of those distant cries make up the chorus of woodland sounds. But by the time summer is in full swing, that gentle aria can become a deafening cacophony. And one very frustrated skeleton had about as much as he could take of the battle cries of the most foul creature he had ever come to encounter on the surface. The cicada. It was bad enough they seemed to love his vehicle's windshield. The blasted things would swarm in a thick cloud as traffic slowed, slamming into his windshield with a fervor he had only seen from the rare hailstorm. It was worse when he actually picked up some speed, for the mess they left in their wake upon meeting an untimely end meant he inevitably had to stop by the gas station every evening to dispose of the evidence. It wasn't just his vehicle they loved. No, for some reason, the bug-eyed beacons of frustration seemed attracted to the color red, and he, unfortunately, seemed to be just their type. He swore if he had to dodge one more of those little pests, he was going to have shish kabeetle for lunch. Except not really, because that was gross, and even during his roughest days underground, he had never been so bad off that he would have been tempted to eat something that looked like a six-legged miniature eldritch beast. Then again, there were a lot of things he wouldn't have considered while underground. Being friends with a bunch of humans, for instance. Sure, there was Frisk, but Frisk was a sweetheart, and a child at that. What he didn't expect was for other humans, adult humans, to want to have much to do with him. Heck, most monsters didn't even want to have much to do with him, besides his brother, anyway. Red's thoughts evaporated as he heard his phone go off with an all-too-familiar ringtone. Well, speak of the devil, am I right? He fished his phone out of his coat pocket and saw the message. Incoming! With a chuckle, he shoved himself up from the sofa and plodded over to the door in time to hear a wild shriek draw closer and footsteps racing up onto the porch. He opened the door as you yanked back the screen door, still shrieking and swatting at the air around your head. Instantly, magic enveloped several of the flying menaces before a flick of Red's finger bones sent them sailing back off toward the yard as you darted past, your scream ringing in his non-existent ears as he watched you run over and tackle the couch. As the screen door slammed to, the undeterred cicadas zoomed back, slamming into and bouncing off the tough mesh with reckless abandon. Red barked out a triumphant laugh. "Better luck next time, fuckers!" he shouted before shutting the door in the face of the attempted invaders. A large, fluffy cat ran up and rubbed against his legs, trilling loudly as she was denied her chance to investigate the chaos. Red looked down at the purring feline and grinned. "Only room around here for one loud pest, and that's your owner. Ain't that right, you little mooch?" Doomfanger merely meowed and hopped up, rubbing her arched, fluffy back against his leg. Red just shook his head and casually stepped around the cat, leaving her to sniff at the bottom of the door and the shoes Red kicked off nearby. "You okay over there?" You're looking like you ran a mile with my brother and Undyne chasing you. You let out a disgusted noise and gagged, shaking dramatically before you moved over to allow Red a place to sit. You were even less of a fan of cicadas than he was, though that distaste extended to most things insectoid. Oddly enough, you were fine with most monsters that resembled creepy-crawly things, but you had told Red that's because you didn't have to worry about waking up and finding one of them in your bed. You hadn't been too pleased at his hollering at Muffet and asking her if she wanted to make 5G. He flashed you a toothy grin, remembering how you smacked his shoulder over that one. He swaggered up to the couch, deciding he would mess with you a bit. You looked up at him and asked him what was with the look he was giving you, which only made him grin wider. This, in turn, made you regard him with great skepticism, because this was far from the first time he had pulled something on you. You learned fast, after all, as fast as most monsters in the underground. Fortunately, you weren't exactly love fodder to everyone the moment you walked out the door. All you had to deal with was pranks, dark humor, and Red's flirting. As he regarded you, Red could already tell you were mulling it around inside your head, wondering where the roulette wheel would land today. Not having any prompts with him, and without any particularly good puns coming to mind, he fell back to his third favorite way to mess with you. Cocking his head back, he looked down at you. What? No reward for the hero? You raised an eyebrow and asked, What hero? Already bracing himself for the swats it would get him, Red leaned down and looked you in the eyes. And here I thought playing your knight in shining armor would at least get me a little sugar. With a snort, you reached over and playfully tugged at his coat sleeve, commenting on his lack of anything resembling armor. Why, this is armor, Red proclaimed. Magic armor. You know, like those chainmail bikinis human women wear in like every video game ever. His sarcasm earned him an eye roll and a hand wave. Fine. Be ungrateful, he said, grin never leaving his face as he flopped down next to you. Red noticed your eyes still roving over him as he reached for the remote. I hope you got a library card if you plan on checking me out. He mentally checked off a win for him at your frustrated groan. It was just too easy to mess with you, but you liked it. This sort of thing was just how you two rolled. Most people he threw his lines at did not conjure the most welcome reception, and while Edge, his Papyrus, could throw back a joke or pun, it was much more fun to annoy him with them instead. Easy, too. But with you? The banter was easy, but in a different way. You could trade jokes with him all day. But when it came to the other stuff, it was so fun to rile you up with puns, pickup lines, and innuendos, all leading up to a playful smack to the arm or a loud, "Get out!" Seriously, he had a mental checklist. At this point, it was 43 shoulder swats and 147 get-outs, and that was just this week alone. Striking up a friendship with you was on his, admittedly short, list of good decisions. He'd been slow to warm up to you, and while you were civil enough, it was roughly the same way with you. It took a few mutual complaint sessions before he found out the two of you actually got along fairly well together. And once you fell into an easy pace, neither of you climbed back out. And that suited you both just fine. So, you two started having these little post-work vent sessions a couple times a week. Not that ranting about stupid customers and annoying coworkers was all you did, mind you. Sometimes, it was just chilling on the couch and watching TV or playing competitive video games, binging on pizza and taunting each other over what some character was going to do or who was going to win a digital go-kart race. Other times, it was just sitting and shooting the breeze about whatever came to mind, until Paps, Edge, came home, signaling it was almost time for you to head home. Usually after Edge stuffed you full of lasagna or whatever else he was cooking if you hadn't already eaten. Still, he did want to know why you were looking over him so weirdly. So, he asked. His coat. That was it? Yeah, he supposed it was a little weird when it was so blasted hot outside. But the temperature never bothered him and his brother much, no matter which way the mercury swung. That's what he told you, anyway. The truth was that he just felt better with a coat on. Particularly so around you. He'd never admit it, but it was comforting having the physical barrier between the two of you, no matter how hot it got. Sure, he didn't have his soul on display, and maybe you couldn't read all of his tales yet, but he didn't want to take the chance on you reading into him more than he wanted you to yet. You were perceptive, after all, and pretty persistent when it came to getting an answer. Now and then, the thought did occur to him if the line would ever cross into something else, but he usually beat that idea back down with a stick. You had a nice thing going, and, yeah, while he liked you, he wasn't exactly ready to pick out curtains or anything. And you were pretty chill with your hangout sessions and hadn't exactly taken the bait to any of his lines. Sure, on the rare occasion, you would pop back with a flirty one-liner of your own that would catch him off guard and send his bone brows almost into orbit. But he would usually catch himself and wind up either chuckling over your embarrassing yourself, or throwing back lines until you were a spluttering mess. It was just too easy with you. That was fine. Logically, it was probably his loneliness getting the better of him. He was only learning now that most humans weren't going to stab him in the back, or front, and actually interacting with a population that wasn't trying to carve up his low HP for free XP was still very new to him. And nobody undoes a lifetime of conditioning to the underground overnight. Having allies was common down there, and sure, there were a few he could trust with his life, but beyond that, best not to overthink things. Or try not to. That's what the therapist suggested, right? Let things play out and see where they would go. No needing to stress over nothing. No need to have hoped the look had any heat behind it. At least it wasn't discussed, he thought with relief, then rolled his shoulders and fell back into his smug facade. About that time, Doomfanger came over and started pawing at his leg, meowing plaintively. Red frowned and gently nudged her to turn loose. Hey, cut that out! I ain't your owner. Go on, you ain't getting in my lap. This displeased Doomfanger greatly, who proceeded to continue her snaking around his legs, bumping up against them and batting at the hems of his shorts. What's got into you, you crazy fuzzball? I said no! Now shoot! He hammered his point home by picking Doomfinger up with his magic, and depositing the whining ball of fluff into the plastic tub that held the ungodly amount of cat toys Edge had gotten her. Doomfinger turned around and immediately hopped out of the crate, running right back over to Red to start up again. This time, Red made sure she wound up on the second floor landing, so it would take her a while to come back down. You commented that Doomfinger seemed awfully insistent on cuddles today. Yeah, well, he said, slapping his thigh. This slap ain't no seat for pussycats. He fixed you with another look, and let out a chuckle. But I could make an exception if we dropped the... He watched with amusement as your eyes grew wide at the impending pickup line, and then was promptly confused, because your face looked a lot more horrified than exasperated. You were also tensing up and slowly leaning back. What's the matter, sweet cheeks? Cat gotcha? His name fell from your lips in a panicked whisper. He corked a bone brow at you, only to see a trembling finger gesture toward the fluff of his jacket hood as you told him to look down. Confused, he reached over and grabbed his hood to pull it over, with you letting out a squeak and telling him not to do that and... Oh, hell no. Apparently, during your mad dash inside, one of the cicadas must have gotten inside when he turned around to watch you run past. Though with a view like that, who could blame him? The universe, apparently, because his not-so-furtive glances at certain parts of one of his few friends was now being punished through the judging, multifaceted eyes of a nearly 4-inch-long, orange and yellow bug. Red had only enough time to register that thought before the beast, having been disturbed from its fluffy resting place, sprang into action. Letting out a noise he would never admit to making until his dying day, he fell back as the cicada flew directly up into his face. He flailed back, shaking his head and hoping to dislodge it, but was horrified to feel itchy insectoid legs grasping at his eye socket. Normally, he would have just grabbed it and thrown it away, but something about having the recesses of his skull peered into made him forget that hands are a concept. Instead, his eyelight shrank back into his skull, allowing him to see the darkened recesses of his skull's interior outlining his eye socket, which now framed a cicada that was staring into his eyelight, like it was about to come on in and make itself at home. To be honest, Red could really have done without knowing what the acoustics of his skull sounded like with that cicada's call vibrating halfway into it. He screamed. You screamed. The cicada went wee wee whir. Then suddenly, the bug was yanked away, allowing his eyelight to return to its normal position. With a wild cry, you flung the hapless bug across the room, shaking your hand from your bad case of heebie-jeebies. Red watched in shock as the bug landed at the bottom of the stairs half a room away behind you. When it started to take off again, you shrieked and leapt into his lap, trying to get as far away from the six-legged terror as possible. He only grabbed you out of... Oh. Well, damn. If he said out of fear, he'd be laughed at. But if he said otherwise... Wait, there was a cicada about to start flying around his house. He needed to get his priorities straight. You did kind of feel nice in his arms, though. The cicada righted itself and turned around as your arms wrapped around his shoulders, clinging for dear life. It looked at you both, obviously not having liked its unorthodox flight, and prepared for takeoff. Into the air it rose, only to disappear under the weight of one very fluffy, very hungry cat. Red could only watch as his brother's very pampered pet, this creature that Edge usually went through the painstaking process to make fresh homemade cat food for, fell upon the cicada like it had insulted her mother, grandmother, and third cousin's great aunt. Doomfanger made short work of the buzzing beast, happily munching down her crunchy snack like it was a fine delicacy. Shakily, you mentioned you supposed that was why she wanted Red to pick her up. Yeah, I guess so, he admitted, making a mental note to find where Edge stowed the dried catnip and just give her all of it. That was when he realized there was another pressing matter at hand. And by that he meant your whole weight pressing down on his lap. He swallowed heavily and let out a chuckle, and he couldn't help but give the body in his arms a little squeeze. I know I asked for a reward for helping you get away from the cicada army, but I didn't expect you to just jump me. Red expected the groan and the eye roll. He didn't expect you to stay in his lap for a little while longer. Red knew you were just watching to make sure the cicada wasn't coming back anytime soon, but he couldn't help but hope that, maybe, this could be a new part to you guys' weekly routine.